inviting me. I'm delighted to participate in this inaugural panel with friends of your series of discussions on 2024 US presidential elections. You have given us, as a panel, 6 questions to briefly respond to, and I will try to spend about 1.5 or 2 minutes on each of these questions. The first one, of course, is a rather populist question of who is likely to win. And apparently, we don't know as of now who of the two is likely to win. In fact, every next week we are getting even more confused. So the margins, for instance, are shrinking. The last few weeks in a couple of states, the margins of advantage Donald Trump has come down to 1%. So to me, the deeper question is, can we really rely on these the polls and surveys and media headlines and debates that are giving us indications in terms of getting more excited about who is going to win? There are some deeper questions. I think, first of all, the very system of US elections is very unique. So, very often, as was said before, the popular vote at the national level does not really mean the candidate is going to win because, in a very specific way, winner takes it all principle decides that any candidate who wins in a particular state takes all the votes of that state, and the runner-up takes just zero, except for exceptions of 2 states. Maine and Nebraska perhaps still follows a proportional voting system in that sense. So, given the fact that U.S. Electoral College can, come out with a very different picture than all of us has been seeing what is being insinuated and projected in media and other surveys, could surprise us all in that sense. Second important area where analysis often say let's focus on the combination of swing states, and swing states are again very extremely interesting. For example, last time in 2020, Joe Biden in Arizona, uh, out of 3.4 million votes cast, uh, became victorious with just 10,500 votes and took all the votes of that state in that sense. Add to Arizona this new idea of this time Christian Cinema, the Democratic turned independent candidate, could have also certain influence of how votes go, whether they get divided. Issue of abortion rights is very significant. Georgia is another very interesting example where, last time Joe Biden again won on Trump with just 0.2% votes. So, in fact, that was partly the reason why Trump was so upset and thought he had not actually lost elections. Same is true of other swing states, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina. For example, Trump, again in North Carolina, another very interesting story. 2016, Trump had 3.66% advantage in votes. That catapulted to 48% advantage when he actually lost national elections to Joe Biden in that sense. Pennsylvania, another big state, very, very interesting case, sometimes makes and breaks destinies. Wisconsin, likewise. Then there are wild cards, which often also, show very surprise results. For example, in 2016, Hillary Clinton lost in 2 very important states, Minnesota and New Hampshire, which were known as Democratic states at that time. So enormous uncertainties, which makes our all analysis really subject to, sort of all kinds of strange possibilities. Second question is what democratic and international factors are going to play up in shaping outcome of these elections. I will not focus much, which is in public debate in terms of economy, taxes, unemployment, immigration, foreign policy, and so on. Let's look at the first important question. As you said, domestic and international. Are these elections engaging the domestic voter just as much as it is engaging the global analysis around the world? Most surveys show that about 40% of Americans do not have any interest in election news. You know, and whatever people are looking at in terms of social media, particularly, are largely splintered media coverage and analysis, where we are all talking to our kind only. So the followers are talking to other followers. Of course, to some extent, I understand that people who have no interest in election news are still listening to those who have. So marginal factorization. So fundamentally, again, media, I don't think makes and breaks American elections in that sense. One has to go really deeper into what matters, and therefore news and context perhaps is more significant then media itself germinating, sort of certain trends which I think are difficult to imagine. So I understand that there could be important news like Joe Biden stepping aside is a big news. It can be cultivated. Uh, in that context, sudden arrival of Kamala Harris and her quoting her mother that you were not, you didn't fall from the coconut tree, that created a meme which also became popular, or assassination attempts on Donald Trump. So news and context is significant, but media itself cannot make any non-event into an event. For example, even the presidential debates have become less exciting. Less number of people are watching these things. Third, I think it's also significant to look at how we are seeing these elections being guided by what is likely to happen to Supreme Court, which has become fairly active, particularly on issue of abortion now. Estimates are 9 judges could step aside because of either health or death in next 4 years. These are doomsday projections, conspiracies. Fourth, of course, is impact on consumers, inflation, and what is going to happen to government spending. On that, there is no very clear debate dividing two candidates. Then, of course, fifth, the whole recent report on Hillary Clinton's health statistics has brought the focus now on Trump, and people are talking about his, levels of cognition. Psychiatrists are saying that our cognition starts come from, sort of decaying from the age of 30s. Now, given that he's seen as the oldest candidate, those questions also might impact voters. And I think sixth and most significant thing is the divide between urban and rural voters. And we all know that Trump has a very dedicated cadre of voters. In 2016, now we know he had advantage of 2-1 in rural versus urban votes. And to me, to some extent, in United States, the traditional historical north-south divide has clearly been now replaced by urban-rural divide. And I think one needs to see that seriously. And I don't think media is really seriously looking at it. Third question you asked is how will elections impact foreign policy? I don't think elections are going to, in any case, impact foreign policy. There is a largely bipartisan understanding and consensus on most issues, except that how those foreign policy challenges or issues will be implemented will vary with each of the two candidates that you're talking about. The most close allies in Europe are worried that with Trump coming, I mean, you remember last time he had even threatened to walk out of NATO. He was pushing for burden sharing with his allies, that everyone should take to 2% of GDP of the defense expenditure. Kamala Harris, by comparison, is a firm supporter of NATO, and same is China as well. I mean, again, tariff wars will continue, except that Kamala Harris would be relatively more suave and subtle in doing that, and Trump could really ratchet up things in terms of whimsical sort of speech act that he does. Fourth question talks about what are the key challenges and opportunities. And again, I think outcomes of these elections are not going to change American challenges or opportunities in any case. However, of course, we understand again which of the two becomes the president may have his own vision and speed and pace, and that will decide how those opportunities become challenges or challenges become opportunities. Of course, in that debate, we hear now increasingly rather crass binaries of Kamala Harris versus Trump, being wiser versus bolder, sensitive versus tough, and so on debate, which is reaching ridiculous levels sometime. The fundamental challenge to United States is constantly accentuating, and that is becoming difficult. And that challenge is polarization at home and a relative decline in global leadership that will continue. So the fifth question in terms of what are notable achievements that Trump and Kamala Harris can bring to the table to convince voters, I again think that everything that Trump talks about, he talks in terms of superlatives. He's been unique, first, historic, and so on in whatever he mentions, and he doesn't take criticism seriously in that sense, and reverses Kamala Harris, which as vice president has not done anything which can be directly connected to her contribution either in foreign policy or in domestic politics in that sense. But second and most important in this issue of discussion is the whole debates have continued to be personalized. But that is happening around the world to some extent. And therefore, the focus is hardly on issues. Trump was seen caricaturing Joe Biden before. Now he's caricaturing Kamala Harris. He talks of her as radical socialist. calls her comrade Kamala, calls her laughing Kamala, and so on. And Kamala Harris has happily responded to it by saying that she's a capitalist and who wants to work for business and capital growth. Luckily, stocks are rising, so that slightly goes into favor. Just recently, last month, inflation is beginning to come in control. That could be going into fashion in our favor. But we also noticed the real politic of last month's UN General Assembly holding Summit of the Future, and so many international leaders were in United States, and we saw a large number of these leaders trying to have meetings with Donald Trump, and that increases his visibility in that sense. Last and sixth question is about campaign strategies that are being employed by Democrats and Republicans. Republican strategists have constantly faced, sort of difficult scenarios. Even their donors have gone public. Many of their important leaders have gone public, saying that once Joe Biden stepped aside, this had clearly disrupted their strategies of a very personalized stereotype caricaturing of Joe Biden that continued until July. And in that sense, now they're dealing with Kamala Harris, who's very clearly, largely seen even by Republicans as younger, smarter, humorous, articulate, in that sense, picking up momentum in her campaign and fundraising and so on. So fundamentally, more and more Republicans every next week are, showcasing that they are more nervous in terms of very clearly expecting a tough and close race between the two candidates. And at that kind of context makes Democrats feel an upswing and excited and seem hopeful that perhaps, Kamala Harris could make history. But my last point in last 10 seconds, history of United States shows that they have not been ever favorable to women candidates. Three times women candidates have tried before. So now whether in this whole chaotic scenario, whether Kamala Harris will actually make history remains yet to be seen. But I always caution that media that is debating these issues driven by headlines perhaps is missing a lot of the real ground shaping issues that are going to really deliver results. And I think hopefully there should be some serious academic work done on the field to really pinpoint what is going to create, sort of outcomes out of these elections, because just at the surface level analysis driven by, quickly done surveys and saying 25% say this and 27% say that is changing on almost everyday basis. So I remain extremely skeptical of particularly the situation where these two candidates are almost now neck to neck and there is no decisive clear victory in the picture for us now. Back to Pramod.